And we are back, everyone. The mid portion of our National Signing Day extravaganza here, our marathon running about 12 hours of coverage here. So I've mentioned this a number of times. So since I am locked in here, if you have any news coming across your wire there in the live chat, please drop it to keep us updated on any signings out there. We got Daniel Black on the line from Rivals to talk of Mississippi State football. You can join him on MSU Bulldog Blitz. Daniel, how you doing today?
Pretty good, Mark. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Appreciate you stopping by to talk Mississippi State football with a couple interesting stories coming in on this National Signing Day. And of course, 90+% of the class, as is standard now over the last 4 years, signing in December, but still Ty Cooper coming into the fold as a defensive end. And we don't know about one Catravian Hargrove, who's a very much sought-after running back who's not necessarily headed to Mississippi State, but he had made that commitment here in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, Catravian Hargrove has sort of been an interesting case, at least today. But yes, I mean, about 95% or so, as you mentioned, of Mississippi State's class signed back in December, which is sort of standard at this point for Mississippi State. They are really getting a lot of that class locked in the early signing period. But Catravian Hargrove was a very interesting case because State fans, State people, at least externally, didn't know who he was back in December. Within the last couple of months, he was rumored to have all of a sudden had State at his top choice, and then he ultimately committed about a week ago. He was initially committed. He's from Ruston, Louisiana, originally committed to Louisiana Tech. But his case is really interesting because he's committed to Louisiana Tech. He's a 4-star prospect. So you'd expect, maybe he would commit to a bigger school, but no, he stuck at Louisiana Tech. But then he got a lot of offers from Power 5 schools in the last month or so. And apparently he was waiting on that Mississippi State offer. There was something about Mississippi State that really intrigued him. And when he did get that Mississippi State offer, State vaulted up to his top choice and ultimately committed. Now, he hasn't signed today. There's some rumors swirling about why that's the case. Nothing official yet. So, there's nothing fact-based I can say just yet in terms of Hargrove signing. But regardless, right now he's a commit for Mississippi State at the running back position, which obviously, Mike Leach likes to use the running backs in different ways, particularly as a receiver using them in the receiving game. So it'll be interesting to see how he can fit into that system. But right now he's a commit. Not sure about if he'll sign today or not. But regardless, for right now, he is committed to Mississippi State and looks to be a Bulldog.
Yeah, Catravian Hargrove, a 4-star, as he mentioned, Rivals, 7th-rated running back in the country, the 11th-rated player in the state of Louisiana, again, according to Rivals. And what do we know about the defensive end, Ty Cooper?
Yeah, Ty Cooper is a prospect who he's a 3-star. He hasn't gotten tons and tons of notable offers, but he's someone that the Mississippi State coaching staff is really high on. The defensive coordinator, Zach Arnett, said in an interview that was posted today on Mississippi State social media pages that he's someone that the defensive coaches at Mississippi State are expecting to be potentially the next great Mississippi State defensive lineman. I mean, you think of some of the defensive linemen that Mississippi State's had within the last decade, guys like Fletcher Cox and Chris Jones and Preston Smith and Danico Autry and Jeffrey Simmons, Montez Sweat. I can go on and on. So when you have those kinds of names who are tearing it up in the NFL at the defensive line position for Mississippi State, and these defensive coaches are expecting him to potentially be the next great defensive lineman in Mississippi State, that's pretty high praise. And this is a guy who, I mean, some of his other offers are Air Force, Alcorn State, Austin Peay, and Arkansas State. So you just look at his recruiting profile, you say, I don't really know what jumps out. But it's very fascinating to see the Mississippi State coaches so high on him. He's someone that the Mississippi State coaching staff has really wanted for a while. And now he's officially signed as a Mississippi State Bulldog. And obviously, with Mississippi State's defensive history and the way Mississippi State played on defense this past year with honestly a pretty short manned roster on that side of the ball, getting in Ty Cooper to fill in some holes for Mississippi State this coming year and the years to come, I think is a really good addition for the Bulldogs.
Ty Cooper out of Louisville, Mississippi. And if you spend any time in the Magnolia State, you know it's Louisville, not Louisville. It's Louisville, Mississippi. And 20th rated player, according to Rivals, in the state of Mississippi. So now we stand on the tote board there at the last I had tracked it on Rivals was number 23 in the nation. There it is with 22 signees, 5 4-stars, 17 3-stars for Mississippi State at number 23. Those are certainly higher numbers than Mike Leach was used to getting at Texas Tech and Washington State. So he's running across a higher grade of football player. There's no question about that, being in the Southeast. Anything in particular, whether you want to go the player route or geography or positions that stand out about this 21 class?
Sure, and I was going to mention exactly what you mentioned, just the recruiting rank for this class compared to past Mike Leach classes, and exactly what we are talking about today is probably the biggest reason why Mike Leach took the Mississippi State job, and he pretty much said it verbatim in his introductory press conference and his first team meeting, which was filmed and published on social media. He said, he's had a number of opportunities to leave Washington State. He was there for 8 years, had a great string of successes, but there was something about the talent pool in the state of Mississippi. There was something about that talent pool that was just impressed him and knew that he had to take advantage of that opportunity. It's not just in the state of Mississippi, it's throughout the Southeast. So, having the 23rd ranked class in the country, I haven't done the research on other Mike Leach classes at Texas Tech and Washington State, but this could be the highest ranked class he's ever had as head coach. And it's his first full year, his first full class as head coach, which just proves to you the amount of talent that's in this area. And it's exactly what Mike Leach has been looking for. And, you mentioned some specific positions and specific players. The offensive side of the ball is one of the most impressive parts of this class, and that's huge, obviously, for a Mike Leach recruiting class. You start at quarterback position with Sawyer Robertson, probably the crown jewel of this class. He's a quarterback from Lubbock, Texas. And, sort of the corny cliche phrase that's used is, quarterback of the future. But when you're talking about Sawyer Robertson, that's exactly what he is for Mike Leach. He's someone who, I'm just going to read you some stats here, Mark, just from his high school stats. In 2020, his senior year this season, he went 297 for 456, which is a 65% completion percentage, 4,498 yards, 58 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. You add 44 touchdowns and 8 interceptions as a junior and 43 touchdowns and 8 interceptions as a sophomore. This guy is exactly what Mike Leach is looking for, a very accurate passer, makes good decisions. Obviously, that touchdown to interception ratio is pretty much off the charts. And that's when Mike Leach is asked about quarterbacks, which he has multiple times in many interviews. What do you look for in a quarterback? The first thing he looks for is good decision-making and accuracy, and that's what Sawyer Robertson is. And he's the highest rated quarterback Mississippi State's ever signed. So at least since the age of internet recruiting rankings have started. So that's a big get for Mississippi State. You look at John Lewis, an outside linebacker for Madison, Mississippi, Germantown High School. He's another 4-star. He's the 5th ranked prospect in Mississippi. He's another big get on the defensive side of the ball. And then you have a couple of wide receivers who are both very impressive on paper, especially Theodore Knox from Texas. He's a pretty small guy. He's 5'10", 167, but he's fast as lightning. That's the thing that attracts him, is his speed. And obviously when he gets to college into an SEC, weight room and strength conditioning staff, he can bulk up. And then you have the other wide receiver in this duo, Antonio Harmon from Kosciuszko, Mississippi, another 4-star. He's the opposite of Teddy Knox. He's big. He's 6'4", 205. I compare him. He's been compared, and I can definitely see the comparisons to a past Mississippi State wide receiver named Derunya Wilson, who is one of the greatest receivers in Mississippi State history. I believe Derunya Wilson was about 6'5", 215, 220. So if Antonio Harmon can get 15 pounds on him, he's pretty much the exact same build as Derunya Wilson, someone who had great hands and was next to impossible to bring down. And then there are 2 offensive linemen who I want to talk about. Mike Leach loves very big, tall offensive linemen. and he's got two of those in this class. First, there's Albert Reese. This guy is 6'7", 295. He's originally from Canada, but went to high school in Florida. And then he's got Cannon Boone, who's 6'4", 290. Not as tall as Albert Reese, but another big offensive lineman there. So the offensive side of the ball is honestly the most impressive part of this class, and that's something that differs from past Mississippi State classes. Ball State has been able to get in good offensive talent. It doesn't seem like they've been able to get it to this extent, and I think that's something that Mike Leach was stressing in this recruiting class. And the skill position guys for this class are as good as any class, in my opinion, in Mississippi State history.
The 2021 Mississippi State recruiting class is just about in the books. We will wait on Catravian Hargrove, 7th-rated running back in the nation, the 11th-rated player as a 4-star running back out of Louisiana. Ty Cooper, the big signee for the day, a defensive end out of Louisville, Mississippi. We're here talking college football all day, and with, of course, National Signing Day not necessarily being what it once was and being moved into December, we're talking all these team reports across the board. And with Mississippi State, it includes, as it does with everyone else these days, the transfer portal is huge. Before we started to record here, Daniel, we targeted 4 guys that could make an impact on the 2021 season. Jalen Green comes in from Texas, Randy Charlton from UCF, Mekhi Polk from Cal, and an intriguing prospect to you is Jack Abraham from Southern Miss.
Yeah, I'm just going to start with Jack Abraham here because you mentioned him last. He was sort of a surprise, sort of a last-minute get. I believe he announced his transfer maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. He's a guy who is intriguing to me because, as I mentioned earlier, talking about Sawyer Robertson, Mike Leach looks for decision-making and accuracy. And I don't have his statistics in front of me, but Jack Abraham's a guy who, first of all, he's had tons of experience playing college football. I know he has at least 2 years of starting experience in Southern Miss. But in terms of, I've heard that his stats in terms of decision making and just his completion percentage are quite impressive. And that's one of the big parts of a Mike Leach offense is being able to throw the ball with accuracy and have a good completion percentage. And that's what Jack Abraham is. Now, while Mississippi State seems to have a lockdown starting quarterback already with Will Rogers, I think if anyone were to bet on who Mississippi State's starting quarterback will be next year, I think, myself included, would think it's Will Rogers. But Jack Abraham is sort of a wild card figure simply because of his past college football experience, having more experience starting in college football than Will Rogers has, and just that ability to throw the ball accurately and have a good completion percentage. And I mentioned to you before the show how Mike Leach is, he's pretty keen on getting some transfer quarterbacks, and most notably is Gardner Minshew. Now, I know that the Gardner Minshew situation is a bit different because I believe he was probably the shoe-in to be the starter when he entered Washington State. I don't think there was anyone necessarily in front of him when he got to Pullman, and that's not the case with Jack Abraham. But if Jack Abraham has a good off season and a good spring practice and a good fall camp, there could be a slight competition between Will Rogers and Jack Abraham. And honestly, I could throw, as I mentioned, Sawyer Robertson into the mix there, although I think he'll redshirt. But still, I think Jack Abraham's intriguing just because sort of that wild card transfer factor. Jalen Green, defensive back from Texas. If there's a position that Mississippi State needs, it is defensive backs. And Jalen Green is a really good pickup for Mississippi State. He was someone who, according to some services, was a 5-star out of high school and ended up going to Texas. Had some playing time at Texas, not a ton. But in terms of just getting depth and, getting good experience and past playing time at a defensive back from Mississippi State, Jalen Green is a really good pickup. Randy Charlton, as you mentioned, from UCF, a defensive end, 6'3", 235 from Miami, someone who could just be another sort of plug and chug situation for Mississippi State at defensive lineman, another good depth pickup, another one who could has past college experience, obviously, with the transfer portal. And then Mekhi Polk from Cal, the wide receiver. Any wide receiver that's picked up in a Mike Leach class, I'll talk about, especially with Mississippi State's past at wide receiver. Not a ton of depth until this year, but obviously when you're Mike Leach, you need good wide receiver depth. But Mekhi Polk, as I've mentioned with everyone else, someone who has experience playing at the college level. He was someone who was a last-minute pickup because there was a wide receiver who Mississippi State got committed, who would have been a transfer from San Jose State, but there was some SEC rule that didn't allow him to transfer. So Polk ended up announcing that he was going to transfer to Mississippi State about 2 days after that situation ended. So another good pickup there at receiver, and another good depth piece, along with the 3 wide receivers that Mississippi State picked up in the early signing period.
Yeah, Polk caught 36 passes in his couple seasons there at Cal with 3 touchdowns. Charlton, 68 tackles in his career with UCF, 12.5 tackles for loss and 4 sacks. And then the rundown on Abraham, the touchdown to interception ratio, not stellar, 15-10, 19-15, and 7-4 these 3 seasons. But to your point, he's completing over 69% of his passes. That's not a number you're going to find too often.
That's right. That's pretty much I would imagine the main reason why Mike Leach considered him a valuable pickup. And I think it's a big reason why he could be a wild card for potentially a backup or a starting, or maybe even the starting position down the road.
We are talking Mississippi State football with Daniel Black. You can join him and the rest of the staff there at MSU Bulldog Blitz on Rivals, running down the Mississippi State class for 2021. Also, transfer portal additions, Jalen Green, Randy Charlton, Jack Abraham, and Mekhi Polk. Got a question coming in from our guy, the Rod Farva, alluding to the difficulty of the SEC West. I would still consider it to be the best division in college football. I don't think there's much discussion or debate there. What does Mississippi State have to do differently in recruiting in order to get good players on campus and compete? Well, I think Daniel's addressed that to a certain extent. 23rd rated class. I'm going to make the, without banking my mortgage on it, the guarantee that, yeah, this is the best Mike Leach class anywhere. Those Texas Tech and Washington State classes were typically in the 50s in the recruiting rankings. So he's going to see more talent out of this recruiting class, but also at the same time, they're playing against better players each and every week in this conference.
That's right. But I mean, I think it's a situation to where at the same time at Texas Tech and Washington State, Mike Leach was also going against some good teams, especially at Texas Tech, having to play Texas and Oklahoma every single season. Now, I don't think the Texas and the Oklahoma, although they were quite good and competed for national titles pretty much every year, I don't think they had quite the consistency of an Alabama under Nick Saban, and the potential of success of maybe an Auburn and LSU or a Texas A&M, and on the east side, obviously Georgia and Florida. But I think with Mike Leach, it's a situation where having the talent is obviously something he needs. So if he has the talent, he has a much better chance of competing with those big guys than he would with the talent he got at Texas Tech and Washington State. But also to Rod's question, I think also it's a situation to where Mississippi State's kind of lucky with how good the talent pool in Mississippi is. So I think that alone sort of makes Mississippi State stand out. And under Dan Mullen and Joe Moorhead, and seeing it to an extent, not as much, but to an extent with Mike Leach, they've always done a very good job of focusing in on those prospects in Mississippi, making sure that they lock up those prospects in Mississippi. And if you get the best guys in Mississippi, then you should be okay at a consistent level of at least winning maybe 6 to 9 games every single season, which is what Mississippi State has done in the past. Took a step back this season, but that's what Mike Leach is looking to bring back in the future.
The Rod Farva is also supplying us with some research on non-conference games coming up for Mississippi State. We've got a date with NC State coming up this fall. Then Arizona for a home and home. Arizona State for a home and home. I don't know if there's a strategy there. 2026, Minnesota back-to-back, Texas Tech back-to-back, and Washington State. Of course, those last 2 teams pretty familiar to Mike Leach. NC State, if I'm not mistaken, was the opponent for Dak Prescott's last game in a bowl game, I believe.
That's right, the Belk Bowl. In an absolute monsoon, Mississippi State won that game pretty handily by at least 3 touchdowns. Can't think of the final score off the top of my head. But
it was like 41-17 or something like that.
It was something pretty significant. But yeah, State took care of them pretty well in that game.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about these non-conference opponents, what Mississippi State's trying to accomplish if they're going to Arizona for 4 games for any, again, only 2 of the 4 are going to be on the road, but playing the Arizona schools 4 times consecutively, just any thoughts about who they've got coming up?
Well, I know a few of those series. I know NC State, Arizona, and maybe Arizona State. I know NC State and Arizona for sure were both scheduled a few years ago. I know Arizona was scheduled at least while Dan Mullen was still the head coach, because I remember Greg Byrne, Mississippi State's former athletic director who hired Mullen, was still the athletic director at Arizona. He's now at Alabama. Greg Byrne is. But yeah, to your point about the Arizona schools being back to back, it's very interesting. Honestly, with Mike Leach, I think it might give Mississippi State a slight advantage in those situations because they're 2 Pac-12 schools, and Mike Leach, obviously being in the Pac-12 for 8 seasons, knows how those 2 teams will operate. I believe Herm Edwards was the head coach at Arizona State while Mike Leach was still there. I know Arizona is going to have a new staff, so that might be a bit of a different situation. With NC State, Mississippi State was supposed to travel to Raleigh this season, and obviously that got canceled for COVID. So I'm not sure if that game's going to be made up in the future. I would imagine it will be. Not sure what that situation will be. Minnesota seems like it's a very solid program with PJ Fleck, personally one of my favorite college football coaches just because of his personality. And then obviously you have those 2 last opponents, Texas Tech and Washington State. 2028, 7 years from now, who knows if Mike Leach is still going to be at Mississippi State? You never know how that's going to work with any college football coaches, knowing the amount of turnover in college football now, especially in the SEC. But I would imagine if Mike Leach can create a solid program, consistent program, Mississippi State, he'll be around for those few years. So yeah, it's pretty intriguing. Mississippi State hasn't played these quality Power 5 opponents in the past. I think the best team non-conference Dan Mullen at least played when he was head coach was one neutral site game against Oklahoma State in 2013. And other than that, in the non-conference regular season, there really wasn't much competition. So I think that this provides Mississippi State with a very interesting situation in terms of competing against these Power 5 teams. State already had BYU and Kansas State in years past before this year's NC State was supposed to be NC State this year, and State's gone 2-2 in those games. So, yeah, I think it's a good situation for Mississippi State to sort of spread its wings and play against teams in other conferences.
Now, Arizona was pretty awful this past season, but if you by and large look at the schools there and you lead with Minnesota, Arizona State would be at the high end of those teams right there. But basically, those are all teams in their conference, in their respective conferences, that are similar in stature to Mississippi State. So it seems as though they're going out trying to catch that mid-tier across the board in the other conferences.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's definitely the case. And it's similar, Mississippi State, as I mentioned, their 2 previous I guess one of them was a Power 5, one is an independent, but they were BYU and Kansas State, who, when Mississippi State played BYU, they played them in 2016 and 2017. I believe 2016 was Kalani Sitake's first year. I believe Bronco Mendenhall had gone to Virginia already by that point. That was a pretty solid BYU team and a bad Mississippi State team. So BYU ended up winning that game in a couple of overtimes. But in 2017, BYU was mediocre. I think they went maybe 6-6. But sort of to your point, if they were in a conference, they could be a mid-tier conference team. And Kansas State, State caught them in Bill Snyder's last season and Chris Kleiman's first year. And both of those years, they were sort of mid-tier Big 12 teams. So I think your point is definitely accurate. I think that's what Mississippi State's going for. I don't think State wants to overload itself with a major program in another conference because State already has that covered in the SEC West. Yeah, I definitely think that's accurate, that State's going for sort of a very similar statured program as they are in other conferences.
We are up against it here for 4 o'clock talking UCLA, so I want everybody to stay right here on the front page of my YouTube channel and go right into the next live stream. But we do want to honor 904 Hurricanes question here real quick, Daniel. Just Bulldog fans and how they feel about Mike Leach.
I think State fans are encouraged. This past year was a roller coaster of epic proportions, but it ended pretty solidly. State won 3 of their last 6 games, starting 9 freshmen of 22. And has leaked. Leach was the former offensive coordinator at Kentucky in the late 90s. And I think with Leach's past track record and some of the recruits that are coming in, as we've obviously alluded to today, I think Mississippi State has an opportunity to get to that consistent level of making a bowl game potentially every single season. And knowing Mike Leach's past, maybe have a year or two in which State can compete for the West title, I definitely think that's definitely in reach for Mississippi State under Mike Leach.
All right, everyone, hang tight right here. We're talking UCLA football next. Daniel, we appreciate you stopping by. And, of course, catch Daniel and the rest of the staff there on Rivals MSU Bulldog Blitz. Daniel, always appreciate the insight and the information.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.